I call Adrian Rafi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And
So it's a pleasure to rise this afternoon, and it has been an interesting debate, and I propose to add to it. We, as my colleagues have already stated, will support the Social Security Extension of Young Persons Services and Remedial Matters Amendment Bill through to Select Committee. And we do that with some trepidation and a lot of concern, but we think that the best place to examine this further is at Select Committee. There are some good things in this bill, and as I have said, there are some things that we're very concerned about. My overall comment on this is that whilst the eligibility has been increased to 20 years old by this bill, it also seems that the government is raising the threshold of qualifying for these services. I turn my attention, sir, to the regulatory impact statement, and in clause 87 it refers to the statistical risk model. In clause 88, it states the risk model is purely a statistical tool, so cannot include all factors that determine someone's risk of remaining on benefit, e.g. gang affiliation or the presence of tattoos on the face may affect the chances of a person finding employment but cannot be captured by a risk model. However, additional factors such as these will be able to be added manually by work and income case managers or youth service providers to indicate that a young person is at greater or lower risk than the risk model might suggest. And so I think that we need to examine that really closely. It relies on the judgment of a WINS case manager. And I think more and more the feedback that I'm getting from that sector is that the case workers are having to carry out the role of social workers, and they are not appropriately qualified as social workers. I think it would be much better that if this work were carried out by a social worker. There needs to be judgment. There should not be judgment. They should be robust assessments by an appropriately qualified worker. And I think this process is flawed and it needs to be examined more closely. I think also, sir, I'm bound to ask the question and probably answer the question as well. How does this fit with the government's whānau order policy? To me, this is in direct conflict of the government's whānau order policy. Let me explain. If we were applying a whānau order model to making an assessment for the benefit of these young people, you would include the entire family. You would ask about the aspirations of that family, not make judgments based on what a young person looks like, because this is what this regulatory impact statement is saying. You're going to look at the person, and there might be some things that are not captured within this statistical risk tool, and that WINS worker will then make a judgment on, is that person actually a low risk or a higher risk, and then from that judgment determine whether they qualify to participate or be required to participate in this program or be excluded from it. Now, under the whānau order model, that the government it's their policy that I'm talking about, which says that it ought to be about the family, the whānau's aspirations. So how you would work with just part of the whānau in this instance, as my colleague Jenny Salesa spoke about. Most of the people that we're talking about are Pacific Islanders and Māori, a great percentage of them. And so until we get to the stage, and the Auditor General pointed this out in her report as the failings of the government's whānau order policy, until we get to the stage where there's actually communication between the WINS and social services with and as part of that whānau order policy, then we're not dealing with the fundamental issues that affect our members of our families. And I propose to the Select Committee that they look very closely at these issues. They're not simple issues to be resolved overnight, and certainly not by the bill as it presently stands. I think that also my colleague Carmel Sepuloni also raised some very valid issues which I totally endorse. And Sir, the issues that the bill purports to address, I think only partially addresses. Of course, I'm also bound to comment on the level of payment. It is, as Carmel Sepuloni pointed out, more stick than carrot. And I think that based on the members opposite and their contributions to this debate about the future savings within this bill, surely it ought to be looked at as how to ensure that those parents that are required to engage in education, which I think is a great thing, is helping them to be able to do that. And I think $10 is at the very lowest level that you could possibly have. I suppose 9, 8, 7 or lower would be even worse. But, you know, when you think about the cost of that some parents will have to pay to actually get to their education course, $10 is not much to assist them. So I think that the committee should explore that, because also in the regulatory impact statement, it has got some cost analysis. I haven't had a lot of time to dig too deeply into there, but it would seem to me that there is enough scope within the savings that will be made, and as my colleague Jenny Salesa pointed out, you know, preventing people from going to prison in the long term is going to save our country a lot of money. So I think, yeah, $10 a bit is very much on the low side. I think also the requirement for, say, someone to be required to participate this at the age of say, 19 years and 8 months, and someone who is at the age of 20, there is significant difference between what is required of the 19-year and 8-month-old person and the 20-year-old person in terms of the age of their child at which they then have to go to these courses. I think you can't have a one-size-fits-all model, and there should be some transition between those ages, and I think that the Select Committee ought to look at those as well. Sir, I have, those are the main points that I want to make in this debate. I think that there have been some comments that have been made which I think are totally outside of this this bill today, and I'm not proposing to add to that, but I just want to say we're actually talking about real people's lives. real people that matter. I can think of a whole host of constituents in my electorate that will be affected by this bill, and I want it to be the best that it can be, and that's why we support it to first reading. Thank you.